my favorite things about it is it's talking about the space in between, and that I'm changing, but I'm still me. And it's really hard, but this is where life happens. We have an interesting relationship with the concept of happiness because society tells us that that is what we need to aspire to. And the universe actually doesn't function in that way. It's two polarities, and things oscillate back and forth, and that's what generates a magnetic field in a battery. This is how the universe functions on a macrocosmic and a microcosmic level. And if we ignore the other end of the spectrum, not only are we stagnating ourselves, but we're missing out on the whole spectrum that happens in between, which is where most of our time is spent, because that's where life happens. On a universal scale, everything represents this, and you could call it states of compression and states of expansion. The solar cycle that we've been experiencing a peak of and being able to see all kinds of things like the aurora. This is an excited period in the cycle, and it's followed by other periods where the sun is a lot cooler. It's a dormant cycle. Winter and summer and everything in between, the lunar cycle. Within ourselves, the egg is compressed small space that expands into the fetus in the womb. You're contracted and compressed again as you go through the birth canal. Then you expand out into reality. And this pattern exists and happens on a physical level in our body, as well as a mental, spiritual level throughout our entire lives. Have you ever seen a kid learning how to walk for the first time? They're super frustrated. They're almost angry. They don't understand what's going on, and they kind of compress into this like little ball of frustration and anger until it finally clicks. And then they expand out with this new skill and go on until they bump up again until the next thing. Like, okay, now I want to learn how to make my legs run. How does that work? And then they're frustrated again. So this is natural, and it's normal, and it's reflected everywhere that we have the patience to look. The thing is, we are uncomfortable with the other end of the spectrum. When this happens, especially when it happens for a prolonged period of time, Western society calls it depression. And Western society stigmatizes it, we isolate it, and oftentimes we medicate it. Indigenous cultures hold this perspective in an entirely different way. They're more attuned to the teaching and the reflections of the cosmos in nature. And when we look at what is around us, we also are learning about what's within us. If you are an individual with depression, a lot of Native societies actually revere you. You're supported in a much different way because you're either seen as chosen, you are this strong individual tasked with transmuting generational trauma for your lineage. You're a chain breaker. Or you're a sensitive individual that's able to commune with the spirit world, and you're in the midst of a shamanic initiation. Your path is going to be a healer. You're going to be that person who delved into the darkness, become light, and then you can lead other people through that same darkness. And when these individuals are supported and held, the outcome is so incredibly different than it is in Western society. And a lot of the reason is because Indigenous people take the time to pay attention to the wisdom that is all around us. When we choose to embrace frustration, like this thing, this births new and expanded versions of ourselves. It's really important not to suppress this oscillation because when we suppress things, they become stagnant. And then a tension builds because there's still stuff that needs to be worked through. This is how we grow and how we evolve. It's an upward spiral, and it seems like, just as the song said, how am I here again? You're going to keep coming around to the same place until you acquire the skill set to go, oh, I'm here again. Okay, that's not so bad. Onward we go. And the other thing is, Indigenous cultures are not uncomfortable with the concept of discomfort, which is something that's reflected all around us. I don't know if you've looked at like running shoes lately. They're super cushy and super padded, and heaven forbid this amazing sensor that we were given might feel a bump or two. As a body worker, which is something that I kind of retired from, a lot of plantar fasciitis is actually caused by over-cushioned footwear. Our chairs are getting more comfy. They're like cocoons. So we're not feeling the indication of like, ooh, this chair is comfortable. Maybe I should get up and move my body a bit. We're starting to ignore these cues that come out of discomfort. Discomfort is a communicator. It's telling us something. And it was kind of in this time when I was wrestling with the fact that I'm an individual who experiences bigger oscillations between highs and lows, what we would call depression, that I started to really pay attention to what the world around me was trying to communicate in regards to this pattern. And the first thing that it was communicating to me was, dude, this is normal. And it's okay. It's not something to run away or hide from or feel bad about, because that just makes it worse. You're like, oh, I should be happy. That's what society tells us. We want to be the man on the mountaintop. But I feel like I'm in a valley. If you look outside the window and you look at the mountains, you see these beautiful peaks, but there's nothing growing on them. It's a great vantage point, but it's not sustainable. All of the trees, all of the communities are down in the valley in the flat spaces. That was interesting. And I started to look at flowers. And I didn't really understand at the time why they were so comforting, but the way that they would blow in the wind, it was really soothing. And I started to really think like, gosh, I see flowers blooming in the darndest places. And I have a picture actually of my favorite flower. This guy is in the Costco parking lot. It's very far away from like the idyllic meadow with hundreds of its own kind blowing in the wind. And it's on the side of Costco too that like most of the time it's in the shade. I don't know how this happens. There's like no dirt. It's coming out of asphalt. It's up to the side of the step or whatever. And if you've ever watched them make parking lots, it's not like there's happy dirt right underneath. Like there's layers and layers of gravel and compressed stuff, like some kind of weird paper, I don't know. It's not like a happy place. But that flower looks pretty happy, looks content. It's blooming. And I realized that it doesn't really matter what our circumstances, because oftentimes, it doesn't feel like we have a lot of control over that. This flower, its seed happened to land there, and it still chose to bloom anyways. And a lot of our experiences, whether or not they are depression or they're just compressive points in our life that are really, really hard, like the loss of a loved one or the loss of a job, any number of things that can happen to us. And it's really hard not to go, oh, life sucks. Why is this happening to me? I didn't choose this and I don't have choice. And when we're robbed of our choice, that's when a lot of times traumatic responses can take root. But the beautiful thing is that there's always choice. This flower, even though it happens to be in a Costco parking lot, is still choosing to bloom and express itself to its fullest potentiality. And it's also going to choose to eventually compress again and go to seed. And those seeds are going to go off and they're going to find a new place. But the choice that this flower is making to push through adversity is actually making it stronger and more resilient. So those seeds that are going to be planted in a new place, should it be a parking lot, this plant might have a remembrance of that time, like, oh, I've done a parking lot. It wasn't my favorite, but we made it. We did it. Because I chose to always seek out the light and turn my face to the sun. Yeah, we're going to be fine. All that to say, it's pretty hard when you're in the midst of a dark night of a soul to have somebody come along and just say, hey, just be happy. It kind of feels like toxic positivity on some levels. Like happiness is great, but it's an end of this spectrum. It's not the whole spectrum. There's this whole other end that has a lot of beautiful things in it too. So how in this in-between that kind of titrates from if this end is cold to kind of lukewarm, and then we got the Goldilocks zone in the middle, like that's the good stuff. And then it starts to get warmer and warmer until it's hot. And that's awesome, and we want those points in our lives, and they're going to happen because nothing stays in a compressed state forever. It just violates the laws of the universe. There's always expansion. It comes a lot quicker if we're not suppressing and fighting the compression, but expansion always comes. The blooming always happens. I don't know of any flowers that poke up out of the dirt and go, ooh, this is a parking lot, I'm just gonna die. They do it anyways, and it's a choice. And I think if I was to kind of postulate what these flowers are thinking, it's like, I'm here and I exist, and that's an awesome thing in and of itself. So many gibbery notes. I'm used to PowerPoints when I was a teacher, so anyways, okay, found my spot. My really wise and amazing friend said something to me that was actually really profound and kind of clicked when I was thinking about this whole flower thing. And it's creating kind of a ladder to help you get to that next high point. And it starts with the concept of equanimity, which is a state of total acceptance. You're just taking the good and the bad, not applying any judgment to the story, no attachment, and you just observe it. Like, I'm in a parking lot. This is not where flowers belong. How interesting. And then from there, with that foundation, you can of course hope, like this flower is doing, that contentment will follow. And often it does if you allow space for that to happen. If we're kind of trying to suppress and fight and wrestle with the whole thing, it makes it a lot harder for any kind of expansion to take root. Contentment is the middle ground. This is kind of the baseline that we want to strive for. It's kind of that Goldilocks zone. And it's knowing that there's good and bad, and it's simply appreciating the opportunity to be there at all. It's being absolutely present in the experience, and this is where most of life happens, is in a state of contentment. And eventually, once you achieve contentment, happiness is a lot easier to grasp, and it's a lot more sustainable. If you don't have a foundation and you're trying to put on a mask for other people and hold happiness, like, look, I'm happy, it becomes more of a manic state, and you're going to start oscillating between compression and expansion in a more erratic way because you're not creating a sustainable foundation in which to really hold happiness, nor are you really holding the fact that happiness by its nature is fleeting. So is the other end of the spectrum, but nobody talks about that. The goal is to just be happy, when the goal should be to experience all of it, because that means that we're alive. We're not in a stagnated place where we're not evolving and we're not growing. Without truly experiencing bad times, hard times, we can't appreciate that mountaintop moment. So, if we are that flower and we are choosing to bloom, to expand, it's finding equanimity, contentment where it is, moments of happiness as the sun kind of crests around Costco and it gets like 5 minutes of actual sun, and then it goes back again. And all of that information and experience is going within the flower into the next batch of seeds to proliferate. Okay, I'm not going to use that word. It came out better in my head, and then my tongue did a weird thing. But it's going to create its progeny. More flowers, but it's a more evolved version of the flower, just as we're constantly evolving versions of ourselves. Another great example that I like to think about is when we are resisting self-death, which is what these compressive and expansive states are representing on a spiritual development level, we're essentially creating spiritual cancer. In the body, there is a mechanism called apoptosis, and it tells the cell when to die. When a cell becomes immortal, it becomes cancer. Death is important. Cycles are important. Shedding things that don't serve us is important. If we don't do that, we become stagnated. So, flowers, trees, wherever you can find your wisdom, all of this is reflected in pretty much everything. And it just takes a little bit of stillness and willingness to go, yeah, the world isn't all roses. It's thorns too. One of my favorite quotes is, the flower that blooms in adversity is the rarest and most beautiful of all. So, that's it.